It's time for Declare Your Independence with Ernest Hancock.
Believe me when I say we have a difficult time ahead of us. But if we are to be prepared for it, we must first shed our fear of it. I stand here without fear because I remember that I am here not because of the path that lies before me, but because of the path that lies behind me. I remember that for 100 years we have fought these machines. And after a century of war, I remember that which matters most. We are still here! Tonight, let us make them remember we are not afraid!
Yeah! No fear here on Declare Your Independence with me, Ernest Hancock, from the Sundown Desert. Oh, we're going to travel up to Washington State, where it's not warm. Man, I'm having to open the windows, man. I'm getting warm. Now, what we're going to do is we have Charles Rankin coming on. Charles Rankin, we've been following him for at least a while. I mean, I remember seeing his stuff. It was time to talk to him. We have friends where he covers a lot of the stories on this in a rural lifestyle in Washington State. And it is an overreach of. It's a water thing. They want you to own nothing, and here's your happy shot. That's what they want, okay? Now, what's going on, the rural community, certainly in eastern Washington, much more conservative than the coast. You know, you get in Olympia and Seattle, that kind of stuff, and, you know, those don't want to leave you alone. Now, we have very, very close friends that have resources. They could live anywhere in the world, and in fact, they do, but they have a place in northeastern Washington State. They started, hundreds of acres. They got, just private gardens that they do for the community. COVID kind of really beat the crap out of this small community. They bought, the general store and a butchery, and they're taking care of communications and security, and they got buffalo. You got to put up super fences for buffalo. They have buffalo, and they have a lot of resources there. It's an event center. I mean, just because they can. Well, they started using the water from the springs in their canyon that come through. They have been since for freaking ever. This is a common theme. And then what happens? The man shows up and says, nope, you're not allowed. You're not allowed because we say you're not allowed. Why are we allowed? Because you're not allowed. All right. Well, we're challenging. So they challenge it. This has cost them gazillions of dollars. I mean, we're talking hundreds of thousands, if not more, in this. The best attorneys, best readers, the best. In fact, the state of Washington says, well, if you can get these guys that we use, and their opinion is that, we'll let you do it, and you get there. Okay. They come up, do their measurements. Nobody's, detrimental downstream because they're almost right on the Colorado River anyway. They're not diminishing any flow for anybody. They're not. So they take that, go in, they go, nah, we don't care. I went to the hearings with the government. This was, a couple of summers ago. Recently. So we go, and I sat there for 2 days of them going, presenting all their evidence. Or it was a day and came back in the afternoon. Anyway, it was a long time. It was an all day at least, if not 2 days. We went to Olympia. We go to the court. They're a little administrative thing, whatever the hell you call it. And we go in there. Facts didn't matter. They wanted what they wanted. They wielded the power of the government because they can. They didn't give a crap about it. Facts, truth means nothing to these people, and I have no idea what's going on, and they don't either, but they keep challenging. They keep going back. They're going to expose. They help, maybe you'll get a new election, a new batch of politicians. Maybe you get a new batch of bureaucrats. Maybe you get a new... Well, it's Washington State and Olympia, so what are you going to get? So this is an attack on rural America, and this is going on all over the country, all over the world. They want your cows. They want your chickens. They want to mark everything. They want to prevent you from growing food. They want to give their buddies it and collectivize and everything, and it's going to turn into a food thing, and we're going to starve if we don't take care of ourselves, decentralize, and support local farmers. That's what's under attack. Now, Charles Rankin, YanasaTV, YANASA-TV, an agricultural film producer. It's a media company that's dedicated to sharing the stories of the agricultural communities, rural American life, and the broadcast network of YanasaTV Ventures, LLC. The network hosts productions from YanasaTV Ventures, Opalrilla Studios, and Meet My Neighbor Productions. That's what I do. Like a good neighbor, Ernie and Donna's there. I got a tractor, man. You need some help? Absolutely. The world's changing, and agricultural producers must adapt or they will perish. Our goal is to preserve the integrity and distinctiveness of rural life by building content that supports the agricultural community while also educating viewers on how to adapt to the changing political, economic, and social environment. Ooh, if it ain't time for that, we're going to talk about it. How do you do that? What do you do? We do this by covering topics of interest to our rural neighbors and covering their stories, not just our own. While global leaders work to reimagine our rural communities, we are working to rebrand our great land stewards. YanasaTV Ventures. This is the guy and the effort we need to be talking to. Charles, introduce yourself to the audience and add to whatever you think we need to know, from that introduction, please, and we'll get into it.
I think you did a pretty good job of covering everything there. I have spent the last several years myself kind of working on an agricultural journalist podcast that comes out, and I cover a lot of the policies and what the different impacts that they have on ranchers, farm owners, homesteaders. And my objective is just to help the public understand, when these rules come out, when these agencies make these decisions, here's how it actually has an impact and how it could impact all the way down the food supply chain. Because a lot of people just don't understand. They hear something and, it could be phrased in such a way that makes it sound really good to somebody who's just not boots on the ground, doesn't understand how things operate, like the ecosystem, for example. And so a lot of what I have been doing over the last several years with that particular kind of news podcast is to help just educate people and bring them up to speed with what's really going on out there in the world.
Why? Why did you do this? What prompted you to take this enormous task on?
Well, it's funny. When we started Meet My Neighbor Productions, which is a little separate, it's a nonprofit that creates documentaries around farming and ranching. My wife really wanted to do, a nonprofit. And I remember at the time thinking, I don't think we have time to do that. But I was sitting in a restaurant, this was years ago, and they had, folks from the UN up there talking about how, we had to eat less meat or no meat at all. It was destroying our environment. And I just, as they kept going, I thought, wow, this is kooky. If people actually believe this stuff, then they have no idea how our ecosystems evolved or, what things were like before mankind was here. And that made me kind of go to my wife, okay, you know what? This is probably a good idea. We need to educate people on, what ranching and farming is really like, the impacts that it actually has on the ecosystem as land stewards, people who are, and they actually, we've been filming a lot of documentaries at this point, and we've been to state lands, federal lands, private ranches, and most of the time, private ranches are in much better shape than our public lands. And a lot of that is because they rely on the functionality of that ecosystem. And so they do everything they can to take care of it. And when you get into the public land side of it, these land leases and things that you hear a lot about, it's somebody gave me a hard time the other day because I had written a rebuttal to an anti-grazing piece that was published by a magazine, and the editor reached out to me. And at the end of the conversation, they were like, well, I hope you enjoy some public lands this weekend. and I responded with a photo of me up on some public lands. And what did the Forest Service have out there to manage it? Were wild ponies, which actually aren't even as good as cows. But the point is anybody who understands how these things actually function, they know that you have to have animals on it, and those animals require stewards. And so what is a better relationship than to have ranchers out there grazing the lands? But there's so much information that people don't understand. If they don't understand the science, they're just going to believe what somebody tells them. And so when somebody comes out and says, hey, this rancher destroyed alkali wetlands, we're going to hit them with criminal fines, the first thought that crosses everybody's mind is, well, what did they do wrong? And as you'll find out in a lot of cases, nothing. So,
the one thing that I like to add to this is that the idea of public lands or leasing and this and that and whatever, that's one issue, and that can be debated, but whatever. My concern is this. Yeah. It's your ranch. You own the land. It's mine.
Yeah.
This is mine. You see that over there? Generations of FU, this is mine. And they go, nah, not really, because we tell you what to be doing. That's where I get my ire up. I'm going, what is the purpose of government? To defend individual rights. If they don't do that, it's time to alter or abolish. It's your right, your duty. Man, that's the Declaration of Independence. Why it shows declare your independence. So if you have land, you have ranchers, farmers, their land, and I got a government agent come up and saying, you're not allowed to do this on your land, even when it's proven whatever you use to the water is not affecting anybody else downstream, or hell, you're on the Colorado River, or there's something else going on there. And that's why I wanted to talk to you. What is it? Who are we up against? What evil this way is here? I mean, tell me what you're up against. What is it?
To pinpoint exactly who that they are would be rather difficult. But there was a point in time in the history of this country when they sent you out west in a wagon with some horses and said, build whatever you can. And now you have to have a permit to put in a ceiling fan. And it's kind of gotten beyond ridiculous. Nobody really has the freedom to do what they want to do with their own land, with their own private property and the privacy of their own home. It requires a permit. So we've changed dramatically as a country from the times that the country was growing to the times now that they're trying to restrict its growth, at least with, individuals. And that, I think that has something to do with it. But when you look at a lot of these cases, like when you look at Washington, when you look at Oregon, when you look at California, they're going beyond that. They're almost trying to rewild and push the populations and steer the populations out of the rural areas, which I think is part of some sort of bigger agenda. But they've been pretty successful in everything that they do. I mean, the state of Washington earlier this year put an injunction on 30,000 water users and basically said, hey, prove that you have water rights or you don't get to use your water anymore. I mean, these are big movements that these states are doing. And a lot of those people, they're not going to fight it, or they don't know how, or there's no way that they can go back decades, couple generations to find documentation of their water rights. And it has become a situation of, instead of, the state having to prove that you don't own something or you're guilty of something, you've got to prove your innocence to them. And
even when
whether or not you actually have those.
When you prove it, they don't care.
Yeah, they really don't. You can throw every expert in the room at them, and they won't want to hear it, and they don't want to listen to it. And the funny thing is, with the state of Washington, that the head of the Department of Ecology is a lobbyist from D.C. So he has no experience with public lands, no experience with farming, no experience with agriculture, none of that.
He got experience with you do what I tell you, I rule you. That's what he's got experience in.
Yeah, pretty much. And And these guys who are getting into these positions, and I'm just using the head of the Department of Ecology in Washington, because we were talking about that earlier. His name is Six Killer. He's a lobbyist for defense groups, for oil and gas companies, and private prisons. So this is supposed to be a progressive politician, and he spent 15 years. He's still a partner in the lobbying group in DC that represents those companies. And you wonder, what is he doing as the head of the Department of Ecology with no experience in that field whatsoever? What's under the land that they want, that they're willing to get rid of the ranchers for?
We as activists, we saw this progression. It was you would have these people that proved their corruption at the school board level here in Arizona. That is not a paid position, but if you do right by the budget and so on, well, you too can be Presidente of America, kind of thing. So they'll go to be state legislator, they'll go to Congress, they'll go, but they have enough, I guess, empathy or compassion, or they weren't total sociopaths and didn't care to do whether they weren't jumping high enough or fast enough for the special interest in the lobbyist. And we saw a transition from these people that would prove themselves locally. A lot of times it was women, that the late 80s and then 90s, they'd go through the school board, and that's like the farm team for we're going to rule you. Then it would be more the lawyers and so on that came, and then they just went straight to the lobbyist. All the people that were behind the scenes. Now 15 years later, they're the candidate. They're the legislator. I'm going, what the heck? I know that, man. What a scumbag. Wow. They're just going straight to the meat now. So this is what I see is happening. It's not, they probably have willing accomplices that would do this. They come out of college after, the next generation and, a decade of, public indoctrination at the mandatory youth indoctrination camps, the government school system. And then they come out and they go, we're going to, make America better by, killing off all the Americans. So I'm going, it's a evolution, a progression towards this. And you could see it coming. And no matter how much you would scream or tell people, look, I'm telling you, this is not going to be the same country, and this is why it's a philosophical thing and a moral thing. What's the proper use of government? Why you even have it? To defend your life, your liberty, your property. Your pursuit of happiness. Your happenstance, your conditions, your whatever. It's not like an emotion of joy. It's your happenstance. Benefits of stewarding the land and the livestock. I mean, all this is gone in the direction of what? Collectivized central plan of, AI rule you kind of thing. Where is this going, Charles? What do you think is happening? And it's, for me, it's been going on forever. It's a progression because they can, but they get to the point, if they get the idea, well, we locked down the country, we shut off all whatever during COVID, we can do this, the supply chain, or what, we can do pretty much whatever the hell we want. Mandated this and that. Well, there's a lot of resistance, but then when you resist in Canada across the border there, you're getting canceled and your bank account closed and you supported, Freedom Convoy people and so on. I mean, there is no limit. To what end? What is it that you think is really going on? What's their goal, Charles?
Well, I think that part of the problem is that we have elected officials in DC who were put there for, in their mind, one reason, and that's to create more laws. And then you have all of these agencies who are created and developed, and they have nothing to do but sit there and come up with more rules and regulations, most of which were never voted on by anybody. They're completely unelected, unchecked, and they can come up with whatever they want to. And that's what happened with the King Ranch in Washington. They got them for not getting a permit for something they didn't even have a permit for. In fact, they're going through the rulemaking process right now to create the permit that they've already charged them for. And so you have this system that's designed with people who have nothing better to do but sit around and come up with new rules. And none of them ever sit back and say, maybe we need to deregulate, because that almost makes them feel like what they're there to do is pointless. But at this point, that's what we need is more deregulation. So you've got that. And then you've got all these people going into these positions who work for lobbying groups. I mean, almost everything. If you look at the background of a lot of people in DC, a lot of the people in these agencies, they've all been involved with lobbying groups. Well, lobbying groups have one objective, and that's to get as much taxpayer dollars into their clients' pockets as they possibly can. So they kind of start looking at the government in and of itself as an income source. They're not selling their products to the public. They don't care about the public. What they care about is getting, more tax money for their pet projects from the United States government. And the new Green Deal is a prime example of that. None of it makes environmental sense. And I would argue that, the transition to a lot of this clean energy had absolutely nothing to do with reducing our reliance on fossil fuels. In fact, a lot of countries have had to increase their reliance on the older fuels while adding all of this new infrastructure, because at the end of the day, they need all this power because things like artificial intelligence are going to require 10 to 20, 30 times more power than what we're used to using. So you've got to get it from somewhere. So they greenwashed everybody into thinking this is somehow saving the planet, whereas it's all just building up the next gold rush and using as much government money and subsidies as they possibly can. Yeah, and and that's part of the problem is the system in and of itself, people figuring out how it works and playing it.
Well, can the good guys figure out how it works and play it? Or are you a voter? Are you a militia? Are you a non-complier? Sit on your. I mean, what is it that is effective? Because I'm telling you, I've been doing this for a long time, and thinking you're going to vote yourself free doesn't happen. It's just general public opinion, and that's where you come in. You need advocates just like you everywhere around the world, because this concept, I can't even believe they said it. You'll own nothing and be happy. And I'm going, yeah, with this here shot. That's like, it's on. I mean, do you guys feeling it? It's on. I mean, the ranchers, the farmers, is there anybody like not concerned? I'm wondering, in the elections, they just control the ballot box that much, gerrymandered that much, corrupt that much, fraud that much, that they can just say and do all this without repercussions? What do you think it is that's allowing them to get away with it?
Well, I think that it's actually, with social media and the amount of information that people are able to put out there to the masses these days, it's making it a lot harder for them, which is why they keep trying to regulate free speech now. Because, for a lot of these people, they do rely on votes if the elections are, clean and fair, which there's a lot of questions around that.
Not convinced.
They rely on, they rely on the public opinion to stay in office. And when they can no longer manipulate that, when you cut funding to groups like PBS and NPR, suddenly people are going to have to get their information from other sources, and it's no longer being curated. And even the big news agencies, I did a video on this a while ago because I got attacked, but they're owned by 4 corporations, every news station in the United States. And they've got like maybe 7 people who are sitting there handing out the news stories to all these stations saying, this is what you're going to cover today. And so the narrative from Fox News all the way through CNN is still curated by the same people, and it's being hand-fed to everybody. So the more information we get out there, the more people are able to find alternative sources for factual information, the more those people who are sitting in those elected positions actually have to fold. And you've seen that actually in Oregon with Governor Kotek twice now, when the state tried to redefine what a CAFO was, from concentrated animal feeding operations to confined animal feeding operations. It was going to make anybody who had an animal confined for milking purposes, which could be 1 cow, have to register as a CAFO and have all the environmental regulations as a CAFO. When that's news, and this is one of the ones that I got attacked on by a state-funded news agency. When that went viral and people heard about it, the state backed off and redefined what it considers a CAFO. And then they did it again when they went after farm stands and said, well, that's not a farm stand. And you see this in a lot of states. They have farm stand regulations, and then they come in and they try and, create reasons why somebody's farm stand doesn't fit underneath the state laws. And again, after public outcry, she backed off that. But if the public didn't come up and say something about it, and it didn't become viral in some sort of way, then
but
they would have just bulldozed
them.
right on ahead.
They come right. I'll be back. I mean, here.
Pretty much. They will be next year. They are.
No, they always do. They never do they let this stuff. And if you get a lot of attention for it, and you got some kudos for it, and you kind of, they even offer. A lot of times the media, they'll bring in editorial board, and they'll go, all right, what do you want? What kind of negotiating? You'll get off our ass, and we'll help you with something. It's the media is the state. I mean, they're all part of the same thing. So I already know where this goes. What happens is that when you have people rise up in whatever way, I mean, and violence is not the way. You do that, that's what they want. Then it justifies all their crap. But it's kind of a Gandhi thing. Yeah. Sometimes to stand up for something, you just got to sit down. You go, nope, not playing. And it's a moral argument. It's your self-ownership, purpose of government, individual rights. I'm not first do no harm. Non-aggression principle. You don't aggress against somebody. You don't threaten them. You don't coerce them. Government's all that, and it was supposed to be protecting us from that. So when that public opinion comes in, this is why I wanted to support and encourage you with your work. That is what is necessary for people to get in the right frame of mind, from the beginning. Because if you don't understand what this is about, it's just going to keep repeating. And you get different versions of it, or they come back and call it a different name. And here, okay, we're going to regulate you better, but we're going to regulate you. And when you talk about like a farmer's market, my regulation is you can't make them buy it. You can't prevent them from buying it. You can't prevent the person from growing it. You can't prevent them from transporting it there. You can't prevent them from taking whatever currencies trade for chickens, foot massages, golf balls. I don't care. It's called freedom. And this mindset, we need to be governed a little bit better. That's the problem. So I'm going, it's the only thing that government should be doing is to make sure that, rule one, don't be a dick. I mean, don't violate other people's stuff. Don't, prevent, make, mandate, prevent, what. It's so but simple, but they get us into the mindset, okay, well, we need to change the regulation of it. Get rid of the freaking agency. What are the agencies that you're up against?
Well, and just on that note, it's one of the most frustrating things to me is that a private consumer cannot go and buy from a private ranch their meat. In the state of Ohio and in a lot of states, if you pull lettuce out of the ground and you rinse it off, it's considered a prepared food, and you have to have a prepared food license to give it to your neighbor. And it's the most ridiculous thing. We're adults, but we have government agencies who are going to tell us who we can get our food from, how we can get it from them, and then what kind of licenses that person has to have. But we should be, and I'll admit this too, though, we do have a lot of people who are just completely uneducated where their food comes from, that probably have to go into a grocery store to buy their food and feel like they're getting something that's safe. Although I think we all know at this point in time that half the food in the grocery store, more than half, 90% of it has things in it that are not safe for us to eat. But they, let them go to the grocery store. But then why do they have to have regulations in place that keep a neighbor from buying a pork chop from their neighbor? That doesn't make any sense. Go to the grocery store. Exactly. It's all for the corporate profits. It's the lobbyists that are running our country, and they'll do anything they can to prevent a free marketplace that they can't manipulate. I mean, you see it in the cattle business. You see it in just about every industry, regardless. But one of the things that amazed me when we moved out and started a farm was how many regulations there were. I didn't realize that you had to have so many different licenses just to sell, cheese you made off of your goat. It's ridiculous. But in a free market too, if you're a rancher or a farmer and you put something out there that is going to get somebody sick, that the word's going to spread. You're either going to go out of business or you're going to make some changes. And the reality is in the market that we have now that's completely controlled, you have dozens and dozens of recalls. You have kids getting sick from applesauce because it had too much lead in there because they use lead to, increase the flavor of the cinnamon. And those companies don't go out of business. Yeah, they put too much lead in the cinnamon, and it was in the applesauce, and kids got
there's
lead
some
poisoning.
safe level of lead?
There apparently, according to the FDA, there is. That's what I'm saying. Most of the things on the grocery store shelves have things in it that you would never eat, that would actually be unsafe at certain levels, but they approve it, for small amounts because slowly poisoning the human body is not a big deal. But they put all these regulations in place, and then when these companies that actually have these problems on a massive scale have them, nothing ever happens to them because there's only 7 companies in the world that supply us with 90% of our food. So another recall, no big deal. So there is a benefit just in food safety to having a free market. You get rid of the bad players a lot faster.
Yeah, I put this up for the audience. Are you freaking kidding me? Lead was found in certain cinnamon-flavored applesauce pouches, Wanabana, names like that, in the late 2023, causing elevated blood level. This was a big thing when I was a kid. In the 60s and 70s, it's all about, got to take the lead out of the paint, little kids eating paint chips, and I'm like, whatever. I mean, they're really swinging for the fences. But, this has been, it's all bad until it's not. And I go, let's just make sure all the kids get it. We got to dumb them down a little bit. Oh.
They're worried about trace amounts of lead from, remodeling a house that may have had, lead-based paint in it at one point in time, but they allow lead in your kid's lunchbox. I mean, it's ridiculous.
No, you got to wear a hazmat suit and hire a company that's regulated and licensed by, and they get a cut. And my cousin Fred from the legislator, it's so corrupt. At what point did you ever get to the point where you go, this is just corrupt? This is just morally, this is like evil. This is like satanic, demonic, something. Have you gotten to that point yet? Or are you starting to realize you're not up against logic and reason, not even for a profit motive? It's evil for evil's sake. They're going for their front seat in hell or something. I mean, have you gotten to that point yet? You will. I mean, I'm just saying.
It's crossed my mind, yeah, but I usually try and keep it in my videos a little more level, but there is something. At times it seems like there is something bigger going on because I can't imagine people being that stupid, even the people that are in office. But I could be wrong about that as well. So,
well, they're trying to make them that stupid by putting lead in their apple juice.
Yeah.
This is what I realized over the years, and I've been doing this since the late 80s, and I'm 64 now. That's why they call it revolution. It keeps going round and round. I've seen at least 3 or 4 cycles of this kind of crap. And it's just always ratcheting up for more control and they grab more freedoms, more land, more resources, print more money, more inflation. They're just robbing you, with the, it's an inflation tax. They're doing, all this basic fundamental stuff that we've been warned about from some people, but they suppress that information. What you're doing is, it's great that you're not allowing them to suppress it, that you're dying in silence out in the rural hinterlands of nobody knows you're there, and they're just stripping you of any opportunity for some kid, in the 4-H club in suburb of whatever that wants to go out and farm. That's one thing. Now you're not allowed anymore. If you don't buy a $300,000 combine, you can't even start. And you need the legal department, the compliance officer, the blah, blah, blah. This is intentional. And you wonder, it goes like this. They collectivize everything, and then people make their entire money, their bank, their bonuses or whatever, on inching up a 0.5% profit. And when you're a gazillion-dollar company, you get a little bit of dial turn here and a little bit there, and you make a little bit more money, and you get to buy your yacht and live in the Hamptons. So it's incentives, but there's no disincentive. Nobody goes to jail. Nobody gets unelected. Nobody gets, outed, and people make fun of them at the Circle K. I mean, it's all about incentives to me. So it's a general public opinion thing. What is the general public opinion? In what part of Washington are you in? What's the opinion? How does it swing liberal, conservative, and all that? And the voting, I don't care about that. That's not where you're going to make that's kind of a side effect. Like a Trump gets elected, was he the super freedom guy? I mean, comparison, probably better than Kamala Harris. If we had Kamala Harris, the Levolution would be on already. I mean, we'd be like, oh, no, we're not complying. So I'm wondering if his election, or he's just a side effect of a mindset. So what's it like in Washington where you're at? And then talk about the rest of the country and people that watch your videos. I want to get kind of a feel for the feel out there. You know what I mean? Help me out.
Well, I'm not actually in Washington. I live out in North Carolina, but we've traveled throughout the West with the documentaries that we do, filming things.
Oh, okay.
In the state of Washington and Oregon, I have spent a lot of time talking with attorneys that are representing folks up there, and some of the other situations that you randomly hear pop up. And I think Eastern Washington and Eastern Oregon are pretty much the same boat. They're just culturally completely different from not even the entire western portion of the state, just a couple major cities that control the voting rights and who they put into office and who they put into these departments to run the entire state. And they don't even want people in Eastern Oregon or Eastern Washington. They don't want them there at all, and that they've made that pretty clear from the get-go. And if it's up to them, everybody would live within their cities, which are very reliant on the government, which are easier to control. So, but it's kind of they're kind of cutting off a lot of that ability to operate those cities anyway, because if you look at the agricultural resources in the eastern part of Oregon, the eastern part of Washington, the amount of income that those bring in and the tax dollars to feed all the social programs of these cities, they're necessary unless they can get the money from somewhere else, which I think they've already, tapped out. If you look at Oregon, they're practically broke. Same with California. So they're kind of cutting their own hand off with a lot of these policies, but just culturally speaking, the East and the West out there are two very different places in both of those states.
Well, what's it like in the Carolinas? I think it was it South or North Carolina? I think it was North Carolina. I went, we were touring the country or whatever, and it was cheaper. It was like $8 pizzas and stuff. I'm like, what the crap happened? They said, everything's cheaper here. All right. Somebody explain that to me. Why?
It's North Carolina is
now,
actually,
this is like 4 years ago.
Yeah, I was going to say it's getting more and more expensive as time goes by, but and I would say North Carolina has gone downhill with its freedoms over the years. My wife is from Colorado, and we've talked about, if we could go somewhere else, where would it be? And we always look at the ratings of the freest states in the U.S. New Hampshire's ranked really high. Right. So is Florida, but Florida's too high. I grew up in Florida, but the Colorado, where my wife is from, there's no way we could go out there with the the way that they do things. But
well, we're heavily hooked up with the
North
Free State
Carolina
Project in New Hampshire, and if you make the, you just go visit, we'll hook you up, man. They got the welcome wagon for people like you. Just saying.
Yeah. And that's the site we go to when we evaluate states. But it's cold up there. They get a lot of snow. But
yep, that's why I'm in Arizona.
Well, down in Arizona, I would think that state is not as free on liberties as even North Carolina, but I could be wrong. I'm not looking at the list right now.
It evolved. It was attacked. It was, I don't know, red, libertarian, Wall Street Journal in the 90s, the libertarian state, Arizona. Well, I can tell you why, because, all the activists and being buttheads and, doing the Charles Rankin thing. But what happened is that that makes you a target. And that's what's going to happen to the Carolinas and, the East Coast. Anybody that shows a little bit of freedom, here they come. Now, New Hampshire, they're really, those, man, they don't like it, libertarian, freedom-oriented, bite-me thing. And it's the way their government is. They have 400, 500 something legislators. I mean, every legislator represents only 3,000 people or something. You see them at the grocery store. So it's a lot different structure intentionally. Now, of course, live free or die license plate, frame or slogan on their license plate, they want to get rid of that. We can't have that. And then, of course, people resist. But it's no sales tax and income tax, that kind of thing. But the one thing that I can see is that the mechanisms by which they go after. Arizona was a lot more freedom-oriented. And what happened is that made them a target. We got to get Janet Napolitano as your attorney general and then governor, then goes to be head of Homeland Security. Where the hell did that come from? Then here comes, Sheriff Arpaio, I will rule you kind of. I know these people. We run against them. We talk to them. Kind of what. They're not the people. It's somebody that's encouraging that. Something's orchestrated. Something's behind it. Something. And it's almost international. It's like, Klaus Schwab going, yeah, we're going to rule you with our young world leader of we rule you people. This is a concentrated effort. And if we don't find a way to combat that, and our focus has been how many minds can you free? How many people can you make aware that morally what they're doing is wrong and abnormal? I mean, this is not normal. So I am just, I want to encourage more people in your circumstance with your capability and being party and everything, is that you guys go after this. Keep doing what you're doing and let us know how we can help. Because this is not any one place, not even America. It's not one state or a community. It's a worldwide thing, which means they're going to get a worldwide response. And that's building up. And you have to, I'm the love-olution guy. I'm like, it's all general public opinion. Because if you don't, if you try to embrace violence or force it, then I got, a bunch of violent militia gun-toting guys, new guys in charge now. What's the difference? So it has to be an organic thing, and that's why you're so powerful and so influential, and you do a good job. How did you learn that you just, started the channel and started editing and just started, or did you have a background in it?
I grew up with a family farm in Vermont, but I didn't really get into agriculture until we bought our farm. And we really bought it just to have horses and ride four-wheelers, just for recreational reasons. And then we kind of went through a period where our careers changed and we started growing our own food. And that's when we started running into all the difficulties ourselves with, permits. And as time kind of went by, we've got more and more involved within the agricultural community. And our videography company started filming rodeos, and pre-COVID, that's pretty much what we did. Was we made advertising videos and we filmed rodeos, barrel races, and then when COVID hit, we started expanding on that to telling farm stories through our nonprofit. But the more we did that and the more we traveled across the United States, I mean, I've seen things that are just shocking, especially when it comes to, how far NGOs will go. They're like a whole other issue to get people off their land. And so that kind of prompted me to do more research on it, pay more attention to it. And now, that's basically what I do every day is I research these stories. And I don't just, research the story and get the story out there, but I try and look at, the actual policies and, what policies could be done to change it. For example, when we were talking about beef and, the possibility of shipping in beef from Argentina, all of that's market manipulation. But the biggest problem with the U.S. is that most of our small producers can't sell anything because they're restricted by, meat handler license and everything else. The smaller processing plants are restricted on, where you're allowed to sell your meat. If they just deregulated that industry, you'd see beef prices drop at the grocery store tomorrow. But instead, regardless of who's in office, it's always a game to manipulate the market. And, unfortunately, it's always the middle guy that benefits from it. Tyson closes down a plant, for example, that processes 5,000 head of animals a day. You'd think that they would be hurting. But, on the flip side of that, the prices for live cattle to the producers goes down about 10-15%. The price in the grocery store goes up 10-15% because you just took 4% of the inventory offline, and consumers gonna keep paying for that beef up to the next breaking point. And Tyson's sitting in the middle with a 30 to 40% profit margin. When you're talking about these companies, like you said earlier, that make gazillions of dollars, they're making a lot of money on that spread. So I don't know how you fix some of these systems, but that's why I like to educate people on them, is because if they can see the manipulation that just continues to happen with the marketplace, with a lot of these quote unquote environmental regulations, if they could understand the actual impacts down the line and they could actually see what it's like out there, they won't be influenced as easily. But right now, I think it's pretty easy to influence somebody who lives in New York City, walks a block to a grocery store, and has probably only gotten on a train and headed out to the countryside 2 or 3 times in their life.
Yeah, that was one thing at the founding. Thomas Jefferson made a big point of that. He was like, America's a rural agricultural kind of society, the reason that it's the way it is. And then you get, what was it, Tocqueville or something? America will cease to be great when they cease to be good, kind of thing. And to have an orchestrated attempt by a government that we fund and forever in debt for $1 gazillion, it's never going to get paid off, and great grandkids are going to be whatever. But by then, it's going to go. I mean, this is not sustainable. And I think those know that. They don't care. They're getting theirs. They're not for, prosperity of the future of whatever. They'll just, they prove that with, we want a whole bunch of people in here, as long as they're from another country, and they'll do what we tell them and vote for us and, whatever. So it's, and why do you go after Americans? Why the middle class? Why do you why? Because that's where the money is. Our middle class is probably more wealthy than the elites in probably half of the countries on the planet. So it's very simple to me. As I get older, it's just because they can, until they can't. And I'm going, I keep, when is it going to happen? I encourage everybody, buy silver, buy silver, buy silver. Then it shoots up, and they go, how'd you know? I'm like, how'd you not know? Because the government's never going to stop spending. It's going to, and it's manipulated all the hell, and yada, yada, yada. Here we go. Crypto is going to have some benefit and so on. Not so much in it, because they're going to co-opt it and track it and RFID all your cattle and chickens, and and you're allowed to buy this one and not that one with your program money of kind of, because they can. A lot of you think, why do you think that? Because they can. Because it benefits they, them, those. Because it sucks the life out of you. You're just a machine for them. You know, it's just they find out free range chickens grow better and better eggs and better and better and better. We had, you know, up to 70 chickens at one time, and I'm just, they're happier, they produce more eggs, they're good. But you're going to wind up in the chicken McNugget box. All the fruits of your labor, eggs are yours. I started to understand, doing animal husbandry, how we're viewed as a resource. You're just there to provide, and a semi-free market, a little bit of freedom makes you a more productive chicken, but you're still our chicken. And when you start thinking you're your own chicken, well, we're going to remind you, you know? So it's all just so fundamentally clear and easy when you realize these people don't care. They're sociopaths. Government attracts them. I didn't even know what that word meant till recently, the last 5 years or so. It meant no empathy, no compassion, no love. You don't care what happened. They don't care. Why? Because they don't care. It's either the way they're born or where they're raised. They're willing to do anything to get that power, to get that office, to get that paycheck, to control you for their masters.
You know, a lot of the government subsidies in agriculture are designed to steer how you eat. I mean, if you look at what the governments around the world are subsidizing, how they're subsidizing it, they're literally controlling what is produced, and they've made it to the point where a lot of these farmers and ranchers can't operate without subsidies. But they're controlling what is produced and therefore what humans are consuming. And as we know, a lot of the food that we've been eating is making people more and more ill. And so they're having to rely on, you know, the medical companies to get better. But so you've got, I mean, that's part of it. I think the other part of it too is you've got private landowners across the United States, around the world, that are in the way of progress for a lot of the, you know, the future industrial revolution was the technological revolution. They're in the way. They don't want power lines running through their property. They don't want data centers soaking up all their water. If you look at the age of the American farmer, and this is, I think, the same way in Europe right now, they're all either reaching or have passed retirement age and just haven't turned in the buck yet. So over the next 10 years, you have one of the largest transfers of wealth that's going to happen globally. And it's all of these older farmers that are going to be retiring, giving up their land. And you have states like California right now that have already put together grant programs, all sorts of ways of acquiring that land so that they can then lease it out to a new tenant, or, you know, whatever their plans are, reallocate it to certain demographics that get grants and then therefore, you know, have to manage that land a certain way. But they're already implementing mechanisms to control what that future looks like. You've had a century of families and private individuals owning all this land. Suddenly now you're reaching that point where it's all going to change hands. And you just see these people rushing to figure out ways to control how that process works and what it's going to look like in the future. And they're doing it in big waves. So, and I think what you're seeing in states like Washington is very similar to states like California. And, you know, Washington, if you look at the King Ranch, which is one I've been talking a lot about lately, they went in there and they accused them of, basically they had these watering holes, which were man-made watering holes. Somebody in the Department of Ecology looked at a satellite image, because they do that these days. They do it where we are too. If you put a building up on your property that's more than, 10 by 10, they're going to send somebody out to your house. They're going to ask you what it is. They're going to require you to permit it and everything else. Anyway, so they're looking at these aerials and they see these stock ponds and they say, okay, we're going to determine that's an alkali wetland and we're going to press criminal charges. We're going to kick them off their lease that they've had on state-owned land for 70 years, which, by the way, is checkerboarded with their own fee-owned land, the land that they privately own. And so they won't have access to any of that, which is going to force them into a situation where they have to put all their money towards defending themselves. They have to cut down their operation because they don't have access to the land to graze their animals on anymore. And it's going to force them eventually into a situation where they've got to consider selling all that land that's out in the checkerboarded with with the state government land, which I think is always the end game, because they want all the land. They don't want the checkerboard.
Yeah, Bill Gates needs more farmland.
Yeah, well, Bill Gates has a lot of cropland, actually, but he's, and nobody really knows what that guy is up to, but he is literally, with his projects, he's not just, growing crops. He's changing entire ecosystems with his fake microbes and everything else that they're developing, and on a big scale, but.
Well, you go deep dive on it. You find, like his father was one of the big guys behind Planned Parenthood. They were big in eugenics. This has been kind of a goal for his family since forever. This is not, James Corbett, the Corbett Report, did a documentary on, I think it's Meet Bill Gates. If you look that up, you watch that and you go, what the crap, man? They're not, telling me this. Sure as heck not in school. That's one thing I wanted to, I always do this with new guests. I want to, put you through the grill here. Why? Nobody ever asks why anymore. And I'm going, what is the secret sauce that made you care? Why you do that? Why did you go down this path? Was it, grandma and uncle, a teacher, coach, I saw a movie, something, that kind of got you to even care? What do you got? How come you're not? Woo! I could be a lobbyist too, and I'll go whip out, make me some money, But so for you to take a moral stance on this and go down this road of exposing this stuff, and for you to have the opinion is bad, what they're doing. Why? What do you think?
I think I was just raised with the concept that we know how to take care of ourselves better than a government agency. And I want that for my kids too. And I see everything that's happening moving at a faster and faster pace. And, my concern is that my kids are going to grow up in a world where they can't own a farm, own land, and be able to put a house on it, or build a shed without a permit. That they're going to end up in a world where they have to buy everything that they consume from a company that's patenting half the ingredients in that food that could be making them sick. I want them to have choices when they get older. I want them to have, choices on how they live, where they live, and what they put into their bodies. And what I've seen over the last several years with the attacks on food freedom, that's one of the most basic liberties that a human being should be able to have. In a lot of states, you don't even have the right to grow your own food. In fact, I think Maine actually put it into their constitution that you have a right to grow food, and it's still coming up in court cases in the state of Maine. So, if you care about future generations, if you care about your kids, then when you see this stuff happening, it's got to be concerning, because if at the rate things have been going, if we don't speak up now, if the they, them, whoever had their way, it'd be over tomorrow. So, and that's where a lot of my concerns come from. I want, some of the same experiences I had for my kids when they get older, and I don't want to see them or anybody else stuck in a situation where they're basically being spoon-fed, patented food products and everything else because it's approved by the grocery to be sold in a grocery store. And I don't want to see our lands across this country and around the world be turned into basically government property. And a lot of people think, well, then it's public access. Public has access to it. You know how many state parks and federal lands there are that you don't have access to? If you do have access, they're still going to bill you to go on it. So, it's kind of, I guess that's what has gotten me behind it, is because I don't want to see a future where that's the future for my kids or for anybody.
How can you argue with that? One thing before you go, I wanted to make sure that we understand how you could be encouraged. Subscriptions, donations, help me do a video on whatever. This is it's important what you're doing, highlighting this stuff, and have the opinion of just stupid. Stupid is as stupid does. But the there has to be a solution, and for me, it's just general public opinion. Everything else is a side effect of that. And to go, well, we're going to go vote harder. Yeah, how's that working? So it's very important to me for Generation Next to be, there's always a generation next, for them to understand what this whole freaking existence is about. It's about, rule one, don't be a dick, okay? I mean, and the government is being dickish as hell. And that is by how you judge other people by their behavior, what they advocate, what they do. But you have to understand the philosophical understanding that they're stealing from you. They're stealing, portions of your life that you put into something. They're stealing, so your past. They're stealing your liberty. The use of your hands and raw materials to sustain your life, to grow food, to build shelter. Property, the result of your life and liberty. It's just they're taking that. So it's like a past, present, future thing, and I'm going. This is what the American experiment was supposed to be about. And it was so obvious. It's not obvious anymore. And it took generations and trillions of dollars in mandatory youth indoctrination camps to get the people to even tolerate it. I don't think anybody agrees with it. Or there's not a majority. Now, of course, they're in the front row on television being interviewed. Oh, yeah, we got to save the planet from, the children. It used to be the children. Now it's having children is the problem. We got too many children. We got to get rid of the children. First, kill all the children, and save the earth. So it's just, wow. So when you talk to these bureaucrats, these politicians and people, the regulators that you're dealing with, they're not right in the head. They're just not. There's no logic, reason, there's no goal. It's control. It's for them to be able to do what their masters want. You know what they're like? They're like familiars for vampires. They're the insulation for the real bad guy. They're out there. They can walk in the daylight and everything they do. All of a sudden, they're familiars. They want to be a vampire. So they got a long list of we be elite vampire. It takes people like you to articulate this. And I like the way you do it. You're just telling the story, but there's a moral component to it. And if you get too into that or too, you kind of, some people do it a lot very successfully, but just sharing the information and what they're doing is good enough for me. They show they're just bad. How do you determine if they're bad? What's your criteria, for a rogue government, whatever? What's your criteria?
Well, I mean, it could be, I think it's all situational depending on what is happening. But generally, if a government agency is willing to come in and step on your rights and then try and find every single way that they possibly can from you to be able to protect your rights, this is something we brought up Washington several times. In the state of Washington, with what happened with the King Ranch, they pushed criminal charges against the Kings to basically keep them from being able to tell their side of the story and defend themselves. So when they went in front of a judge, they're being investigated for criminal charges. They can't speak their case to the judge, and it was easier to kick them off the line or kick them off the land. They didn't ever actually press charges. And that's why you're hearing about that story now, is because the statute of limitations ran out and they can finally speak up and they can bring their experts to court. But in numerous other cases, they'll do stuff like, you had a problem with your property in your county, it should be tried in that county, but they'll go and push it into a courthouse in Western Washington, and you'll spend a ton of money just to try and get it back into the county that it should be in. And they play these games to break you. So when an agency comes in and their objective isn't just to enforce, but it's to break you, obviously that's a bad thing. And you see that, unfortunately, a lot. But, for me personally, any time somebody tries to step on my rights to choose, my rights to live, things that are, I feel, inherent to us as human beings, I think that that's pretty evil, you know. But and that includes everything from telling me I can't, you know, buy a pork chop from my neighbor. I mean, that's ridiculous, but it's the world we live in, unfortunately.
So are you a permission asker? Do they know about you because you went to government and said, give me my permit for my shed? I mean, are you calling the man? Are you, Charles? Are you a man caller?
No, no, but I don't. I try not to break the rules, but I'm sure I break plenty of them because I don't like asking for permission for everything.
But, you know, the reason I thought you were... I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, you go.
The reason I thought you were from Washington because you're covering it a lot, and you have Buffalo. And, you know, Buffalo's more a Washington thing than a Carolina thing. So, you know, I'm looking at... we have friends that live in Washington, and they got a bunch of buffalo. So I just kind of put the piece together, and I didn't look hard enough. But Buffalo in North Carolina, you're saying? You know, how the hell did that happen?
Well, you know, bison once roamed the entire U.S. from coast to coast. And we've been working on a documentary. Yeah, my wife and I have been working for several years. We're actually about to release the first part of the documentary in January. But in the part of the aspect of this documentary is to help people understand how ranching and conservation go hand in hand. I mean, we wouldn't have bison today if it weren't for private ranchers. And if we did have bison, it would be to the tune of about 50,000, not 500,000. And these animals are keystone species. They're important to the landscape. And they once roamed from coast to coast, north to south. They were down in Florida. So these are animals that created our ecosystem. This is something that drives me nuts about all these people who are against cows, think they're creating too much methane and all that stuff. If you compare, you know, the number of cows to the number of bison, and then consider the fact that bison emit more methane than cows, if anything, we probably went through a cooling period just from hunting off all the bison before we brought back all the cows. I mean, that probably had more of a dramatic impact. But our entire ecosystem was built off of, you know, the impact that these animals have. And so we've done this documentary to tell that story, and then to also kind of show people how, you know, these relationships throughout the industry work. And what I like about the bison industry, unlike the cattle industry, which we're also involved in, we raise cows, is it's not regulated as hard because it's an amenable species. So, and I think that a lot of people will do whatever they can to keep it that way. But it's just it's a fascinating documentary. It comes out in stages. The first stage is talking about Keystone, which is the animal's importance, just to help the public understand, you know, when you hear these things, when you hear people at the UN telling you how bad this stuff is, it's easy to believe if you don't understand the impacts these large ungulates and ruminants.
Well, it must be true. I saw it on TV. The news guy said so. You know, owned by 4 companies. You know, this is stuff that. When did you become aware of this kind of I'm just going to say it, just bullshit? I mean, you're going, man, this is not what I learned in junior high when they mixed government and business and crap together. That was definition of fascism, man. What the hell? You know, and there are no king's protests against the, you know, Washington ranchers. I mean, this is, you know, at what point did you start to get the word, God, man, something's wrong? When did that happen?
Yeah, I think I've always felt like something was wrong, but I think there was a point a few years ago when I started doing this a little harder, where I started seeing it impacting the people around me, people who I knew were smart, that were buying into some of this crud. And so, you know, started off as a goal to help them in a soft way understand, you know, meat's not bad. None of these things are bad. And in doing so, it kind of developed into this whole thing with documentaries, and eventually me doing kind of the news podcast to explain some of these things. But I guess what pushed me off the edge was the fact that my my kids, close family members were starting to buy into these things. And I realized that I needed to be more vocal about it, and not in a pushy way, but in a way that would help people understand, and just kind of counter educate what was being put out there. And in doing so, a lot of times what I'll do is I'll follow the money sources. You know, we had a lot of cases here in North Carolina against hog farmers several years ago, and it doesn't take long to trace the money trail to the funding groups that were behind a lot of these NGOs that were bringing the lawsuits, and find out that the money is coming from alternative protein companies. You know, they're basically they're not going to win the market over, so they're going to try and knock it out with these crazy legal campaigns and propaganda. So helping people see that, understand it, put it together, at least would help them find the truth in what they're hearing, and hopefully make a more educated decision. But it would surprise you of how many people out there actually buy into it.
Well, why not? They're inundated, from every direction on every media source with this kind of stuff. Must be true. I saw it on internet, Facebook, TV, radio, and it's intentional. There was we can go on and on about this stuff. It's just so obvious, and I'm just we're very sensitive to this issue because, like you, our goal was what we're doing now. Occupying the land out in the desert. And my wife is from Pennsylvania, and she just, nope, snow, nope, no snow, don't like snow. And plus our kids and grandkids are here, so it was easy. She goes, you got to build me a house out in the desert, and then I'll be your woman. We'll go out there, but you better be building me a house, boy. So get a tractor, and we just start doing it. Well, the thing is a lot of people don't know Arizona has been very green. We have number one in cotton, number one in lettuce about half the year out in Yuma. We have, we're number 2 or 3 in citrus production. You add water, it freaking grows. It's got sunshine, okay? So that's what we're doing here. We're, kind of contouring the desert to retain a lot of the water, and we've only been here a year, and it's really greening up. It's just, you have water, here we go. The thing that I want the freedom to do that, and what we did to be able to do that is we went really far out, and it was my goal to just, they don't want to go out here, too isolated, there's not enough revenue, unless it's political. Then they'll go, yeah, we got to go get some Ernie because, man, and if you want to come out and get some Ernie all over you, you just come on down, we're ready. Now, one thing that was interesting, I was trying to, what's the hook? It's always best if you can get a rights violation, Bill of Rights, because I've done, I've been Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals arguing, oral argument myself. I just want to make them say it. Something. You're not going to win. I don't care. I just want them to say it, son of a bitch. So this is what we're doing. Well, what is the thing that we can do when they come after? It was, I think it's the 8th Amendment. And it's about cruel and unusual punishments. And I remember reading a case, and it went like, that's rarely used. Nobody ever, cruel and unusual punishment or something. There's different phrases in there, and I can't remember what it was. But refresh my memory here directly. But what happened was, the arguments that they were making is what's cruel and unusual. Finding you, criminalizing you for operating your own land? Is that unusual and, bad? Well, one of the decisions that they did in the Supreme Court, they said it's kind of, ebbs and flows with the sentiment of the times. And I go, that's exactly what I want to do, because what I want them to say. What's the sentiment now? You'll own nothing, be happy? Is that it? Is that where we're going? I just want you to say it. Say it! So that is the goal that I have. When they come after, they're going to charge and do, and you're not allowed something. Boom! Federal lawsuit, because I know how to, I've done it. So, I'm not an attorney, but, you get a filing number, So once you get an arrest number, a court number, a recall, campaign, initiative, referendum, once you get a government number, well, then the government kind of, they obligated to, cover. At least it used to be. Now, it's changed, but we have our own mechanism for getting stuff out. But once you challenge the government on that, all I'm looking for, what is the sentiment of the times? I just want to know what it is. Well, it's not like, hey, it says Eighth Amendment, cruel and unusual. I just want to know what that is. I'm sentenced to go live on the sidewalk in San Francisco. Okay, I just need to know, is that what it is? What's the sentiment? I got my own land I purchased free and clear. I just want to garden, build, a home for me and my poor family. I just want, no, that's the sentiment. You see my point? That's from an activist point of view that they piss me off. We're going to have the discussion. I don't see any other way other than a revolution. I need a revolution between the ears. Because if you just, the violence and the that rarely makes it better until we must, the last paragraph in the Declaration of Independence, we must therefore acquiesce in the necessity. I love that line. You forced us into this, and here's all the reasons. That's what the whole Declaration, this is why we were forced into it. You're a bad guy. So that's the mentality of America, what it used to be. We're coming up on our 250th anniversary, and is it going to ring in the death knell of the rural farm? Is that the sentiment of the times? So that's why I wanted to, introduce you to the audience, let them know that you're out there covering this stuff, because there's not enough people doing it. Now, we went through all the Bundy Ranch stuff out here in the West. We went through their stuff in Oregon. I've interviewed these guys a lot. I get it. It's because the bad guys can. And you need to be there, and more people like you, to make it to where they can't. Because general public opinion is not going to look to the ballot box to fix everything. What are they going to do? I don't know. Just buy, sell, and trade. Private crypto, mesh networks, farmers markets, agorists, you're not allowed, I don't care, we didn't get a permit. That's what's going to happen. That's what we're working on. So you keep doing what you're doing. Yeah. I want to give you an opportunity, as long as you want to go monologue us on what you think you can use support for, what you think is going to happen, what people should do. It's all you, man. Go.
Oh, well, I don't think I have a whole lot more to say than what I have said. If you guys want to learn more about, some of the topics that we talk about, tune into YanasaTV, because I'm constantly pulling up stories, getting behind different stories depending on, what's happening. Some of the big stories we've been talking about lately are, Beauvais out in Europe, what's happening in Washington with the King Ranch, Potter Valley with PG&E trying to tear down a dam that's going to impact the entire valley's water supply and probably beyond. But probably our focus and what we want people to understand is that, these liberties that we have to be protected. We have to stay educated. We have to know why certain policies have the impacts that they have, or certain agencies create certain rules even without the rulemaking process, and what you can do to get involved. And your involvement at least makes it easier for attorneys to fight these things later on. But that's our goal. It's just to educate people and keep people informed, and hopefully, restore at some point some of the food freedoms that our country once had. So that's about it.
Food freedom, man. Can I be free to eat? Please, sir, can I have some more? This is...
it sounds ridiculous. It sounds like the most ridiculous thing in the world until you actually look into it and you realize that it's a thing. We don't have food freedom. We don't have, and that's one of the most basic liberties we can have. And everything that goes into our bodies is controlled through subsidies, regulations, permits, all the way down to you raising a couple chickens in your backyard. most people in this country can't even do that, you know?
You know, in Phoenix, we made a big
So-
deal about chickens and tomatoes. What happened was we started raising, we got like 6-8 chickens or something. We started in our backyard just to see it. I love chickens. They are so easy. They don't piss me off. I don't have to pay attention to them. They do their own thing. They come back and they give me eggs. I'm like, man, boom, I'm a chicken guy. The problem is that, you know, you have roosters, and you kind of get that out of here. You know, I don't need to hear that. I can understand that. But they were going after chicken. Then it became, okay, you can have 6 chickens. Then it was a water thing. You know, can you collect rainwater off your roofs? In Colorado, we were covering this. They go, okay. You can collect 2 barrelfuls, you know, 255-gallon drum kind of amount. You're free now. You can collect, you know, a couple of barrels of water off your roof. I'm like, what the crap? Who are these people? And then we had some fun. It was tomato plants. You couldn't have any edible. You could put all the grass and shrubs and trees and everything you wanted in your front yard. But if it was something you could eat, you were not allowed, you know? And I'm going, this is amazing. So we have fun with this stuff, and that's kind of how we deal with it. We're just, you know, making fun of them. But you know, look how stupid these guys are. I am very appreciative that you're there, and I wanted to introduce you to the audience, that somebody's covering this stuff, that, you know, we can be of help whenever you need some attention to something, and then you never know. There might be some little activism stuff that, you know, winds up. We're always doing something. So I wanted to, you know, just say, hey, I asked, you know, my wife, producer, I just go, get him on. You know, I want to talk to him. I want to see what's up. Because I wanted to encourage you that there's an entire movement for generations that have been going on, slow burn in the background, that they're suppressing, that has an exact understanding of what you're covering and what you're talking about. And that it was the ultimate goal of these people. And now that they're getting artificial intelligence and they're getting, you know, robots, they don't need you no more. Okay? So this is what's coming.
Yeah.
So thank you for coming on and sharing with us. Hopefully we get to talk again, and we'll try and keep track of everything, and we'll, you know, publish it on Freedom's Phoenix and keep, you know, supporting what you're doing. But you can just send it to us, you know, at publisher at Freedom's Phoenix, or Donna's email that you got. You send us videos you want to put up there, boom, done, guarantee it. So we're going to help you out.
All right. Sounds
Thanks
good.
for coming on, man. Peace, brother. It was a pleasure talking to you. You know, and I got to express myself to you. I apologize for talking so much, but I wanted you to know that there's a whole group out here that understands exactly what's going on, what you're doing, and we're appreciative and paying attention. So there's that encouragement. Thank you, Charles, for coming on. I appreciate it. You bet. Bye-bye.
No problem.